I guess I missed the memo about wifely loyalty being optional on business trips. The thought hit me as I watched Mira pack her designer luggage for what she called the most important week of my career. She folded her clothes with surgical precision, each item carefully selected for maximum impact. The black dress that hugged her curves, the red heels that added 3 inches to her confidence, the matching lingerie set I'd never seen before. "It's just a week with Tanner and the client team," she said, not meeting my eyes. "We're pitching the Morrison account. This could change everything for the agency." Mira Calix had always been ambitious. At 35, she'd clawed her way up from junior copywriter to senior account executive at Henderson & Associates, one of the city's premier advertising agencies. Her boss, Tanner Jossman, was everything I wasn't: tall, confident, married to money, and driving a Porsche that cost more than my annual salary as an IT systems architect. I should have seen the signs earlier. The late nights that stretched into early mornings, the weekend strategy sessions that required her full attention, the way she'd started dressing for work like she was auditioning for a magazine cover, but I'd been busy building network infrastructures and debugging code, trusting that our 8-year marriage meant something. "Dean, are you listening?" Mira's voice cut through my thoughts. "Sorry, what?" "I said I'll call you when we land in Chicago. The hotel has terrible cell service, so don't worry if you can't reach me." The hotel, singular, not hotels. I filed that detail away in the part of my brain that analyzed system vulnerabilities for a living. Every network had weak points. Every story had inconsistencies. "Which hotel?" I asked casually, pretending to scroll through my phone. "The Meridian downtown. Tanner booked everything through corporate travel." Another data point. Corporate travel meant expense reports. Expense reports meant records. Records meant evidence. Mira kissed my cheek goodbye, her perfume lingering in the air long after she'd wheeled her luggage out the door. I stood at our kitchen window, watching her Audi disappear down Maple Street, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not heartbreak, not yet. Just the quiet recognition that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't predict. The house felt different without her constant motion. Mira was always doing something, checking her phone, rearranging furniture, planning the next social event that would advance her career. In the silence, I could think clearly for the first time in months. I opened my laptop and created a new folder on my desktop. Evidence log, I named it. Then I started documenting everything I could remember from the past 6 months. The nights she'd come home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't mine. The phone calls she'd taken in the bathroom with the door locked. The credit card statements showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to. My brother Mark always said I had a gift for pattern recognition. "You see connections other people miss," he'd tell me during our weekend basketball games. "That's why you're so good with computers and so bad with people." Maybe he was right, but patterns were patterns, whether they existed in code or in human behavior, and the pattern emerging from my wife's recent activities painted a picture I didn't want to acknowledge. The week passed slowly. Mira called twice, brief conversations where she sounded distracted and eager to hang up. She sent a few text messages about long days and difficult clients. Nothing suspicious on the surface, but the timing felt rehearsed. Too regular, too careful. I used the time productively. A few discreet phone calls to contacts in the travel industry yielded interesting information about corporate booking policies. A casual conversation with my neighbor, who worked in hotel management, taught me about room assignment protocols. I wasn't investigating yet, just gathering background knowledge. Thursday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, one of Mira's colleagues at the agency. We'd become friends over the years, bonding over our shared appreciation for sarcasm and our mutual bewilderment at office politics. "How's the Chicago trip going?" she wrote. "Mira's been posting some interesting photos on her private Instagram." private Instagram. That was new. I hadn't known Mira had a second account. "What kind of photos?" I replied. "Fancy dinners, hotel lobby shots, some guy's hand in a few of them. Figured it was probably yours." The hand wasn't mine. I'd been in our suburban kitchen all week, eating leftover pizza and debugging network protocols for a client in Minneapolis. "Can you send me a screenshot?" I asked. "Sure, but don't tell Mira I showed you. She's been weird about social media lately." The photos arrived 5 minutes later. Mira in the black dress I'd watched her pack, sitting across from someone in an expensive suit. Only his hands and forearms were visible, but I could see a distinctive watch, a Rolex Submariner that I'd seen on Tanner's wrist during company holiday parties. Another photo showed 2 wine glasses on a white tablecloth, intimate lighting casting shadows across the table. The metadata told the real story. The photos were taken at restaurants within walking distance of the Meridian Hotel. The timestamps showed they were eating dinner together every night, sometimes as late as 11 p.m. These weren't business dinners with a client team. These were dates. I sat in my home office, staring at the evidence on my screen, and felt the last piece of my denial crumble. My wife was having an affair with her boss. The business trip was a cover story. The important client meeting was probably fiction. But I didn't get angry. Anger was messy, unproductive. Instead, I felt something colder and more focused settle into my thoughts. If Mira wanted to play games, I'd show her what happened when you challenged someone who understood systems and patterns better than she understood people. Friday afternoon, she came home. I was working in my office when I heard her key in the front door. She called my name, her voice bright with forced cheerfulness. I saved my work and walked downstairs to find her standing in our living room, looking tan and relaxed in a way that had nothing to do with Chicago's November weather. "How was the trip?" I asked. "Exhausting, but successful. We landed the Morrison account." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I missed you." The lie came so easily that I almost admired her skill. If I hadn't seen the photos, hadn't spent the week documenting inconsistencies, I might have believed her. "That's great news about Morrison," I said. "Tanner must be thrilled." Something flickered across her face at the mention of his name. Guilt? Fear? I couldn't tell. "He is. We're all celebrating next week." We spent the evening pretending everything was normal. Mira unpacked her luggage while I cooked dinner. We watched television together, her head on my shoulder like nothing had changed. But I could feel the distance between us, not physical distance, but something deeper. She was already somewhere else, planning her next move in a game I was just beginning to understand. That night, she fell asleep quickly, probably exhausted from a week of maintaining her double life. I lay awake beside her, listening to her breathing, and made my decision. I wouldn't confront her directly. I wouldn't demand explanations or make accusations. Instead, I'd wait and watch, gathering evidence until I had enough to end this cleanly. But first, I needed to confirm what I already suspected. The next morning, Mira slept late. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, reviewing everything I'd learned during her absence. The pattern was clear, but patterns could be misleading. I needed proof that would hold up under scrutiny. I spent Saturday researching private investigators, but quickly realized I didn't need professional help. My background in IT security had taught me everything I needed to know about gathering digital evidence. Corporate travel records were surprisingly easy to access if you knew the right people and asked the right questions. By Sunday evening, I had what I needed. Tanner and Mira had shared a suite at the Meridian Hotel for 4 nights. The room was registered under his name, with Mira listed as his business associate. The expense report, which I obtained through a contact in Henderson and Associates accounting department, showed charges for room service dinners, spa treatments, and champagne. They hadn't even tried to hide it. They'd just assumed no one would look. Monday morning, Mira left for work early, claiming she needed to prepare presentations for the Morrison client. I waited until her car disappeared, then opened my laptop and began composing the most important email of my life. The recipient was Emily Jossman, Tanner's wife of 15 years, mother of his 2 teenage children, and according to social media, chair of the local PTA and organizer of charity fundraisers. She deserved to know what her husband had been doing in Chicago. I kept the message brief and professional. Mrs. Jossman, I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing to share some information that I believe you should have regarding your husband's recent business trip to Chicago. Please find attached travel records, hotel documentation, and photographic evidence from November 15, 19. I've highlighted relevant dates and details for your convenience. If you have any questions about this information, please don't hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Dean Calix. I attached everything: hotel records, restaurant receipts, Lisa's screenshots, and a timeline I'd created showing the correlation between Mira's supposed business meetings and her private dinner dates with Tanner. Before I could second-guess myself, I hit send. Then I opened a new browser window and began researching divorce attorneys. The response came faster than I'd expected. My phone rang at 2:47 p.m. while I was debugging a network security protocol for a client. The caller ID showed Mira's number. I let it go to voicemail. She called again immediately, then again. By the time she gave up, I had 17 missed calls and a text message that simply read, "We need to talk now." But we didn't need to talk. Talking was what people did when they wanted to negotiate, to explain, to find middle ground. I wasn't interested in any of those things. I was interested in consequences. I spent the afternoon moving money. Our joint checking account held about $12,000, mostly my salary, since Mira preferred to keep her income in a separate account for independence. I transferred my contributions to a new account at a different bank, leaving only her deposits and a minimal balance for automatic bill payments. The joint savings account was more complicated. We'd built it together over 8 years, contributing equally to what we'd planned to use for a down payment on a bigger house. I couldn't legally take all of it, but I could protect my half. I moved my portion to the new account and left documentation showing the division. By the time Mira came home that evening, I'd restructured our entire financial relationship. I'd also contacted Mark, who specialized in family law, and scheduled an appointment for the next morning. She burst through the front door like a storm system, her face flushed with anger and something that might have been panic. "What did you do?" she demanded. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been reviewing the prenuptial agreement we'd signed 8 years ago. At the time, it had seemed like a formality, a way to protect the small inheritance I'd received from my grandmother. Now it looked like the smartest decision I'd ever made. "I shared some information with someone who needed it," I said calmly. "You had no right. I had every right. You're my wife. He's married. His wife deserved to know where her husband spent last week." Mira's composure cracked. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. The hotel records are pretty clear. So are the photos." She sat down heavily on our couch, suddenly looking older than her 35 years. "Dean, please. Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You went to Chicago with your boss. You shared a hotel suite. You had romantic dinners. You lied to me about all of it. The only question now is what happens next." "What do you want?" she asked quietly. "I want you to pack a bag and stay somewhere else tonight. I want you to call a lawyer tomorrow, and I want you to understand that this marriage is over." She started crying then, not the gentle tears of remorse, but the harsh sobs of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to find a way back from this cliff we'd walked to together. But a larger part of me recognized that some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. "That's not my problem anymore." She packed quickly, throwing clothes into the same designer luggage she'd taken to Chicago. I watched from the kitchen, drinking coffee and feeling strangely calm. The hardest part was over. Everything else was just logistics. After she left, I sat in our living room, my living room now, and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. 8 years of marriage, ended by a week of poor decisions and a few careless social media posts. It should have hurt more than it did, but mostly, I felt relieved. The uncertainty was over. The patterns had been identified and analyzed. Now, I could move forward with complete information. My phone buzzed with another call from Mira. I declined it and turned off the ringer. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and paperwork and the messy process of untangling two lives that had been woven together for nearly a decade. Tonight, I had other priorities. I opened my laptop and began researching Emily Jossman's divorce attorney. If I was going to war, I wanted to make sure I had allies. The next morning brought consequences. I was sitting in Mark's law office at 8 a.m., reviewing the financial documents I'd prepared, when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Missed calls from Mira's friends. Email alerts from social media accounts I rarely checked. "Popular guy today," Mark observed, glancing at my phone. My brother had inherited our father's dry sense of humor, along with his talent for cutting through emotional noise to find practical solutions. Mira's damage control campaign, probably. I silenced the phone and focused on the papers spread across his desk. How bad is this going to get? Depends on how smart her lawyer is and how desperate she gets. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying the prenuptial agreement. This is solid work. Your assets are protected, the house stays with you, and she can't claim spousal support beyond a reasonable transition period. What about the affair? Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, so her infidelity won't affect the financial settlement. But it might influence custody decisions if there were children involved. He paused. There aren't any children, right? No, we talked about it, but the timing never seemed right. Lucky for you, affairs get messy when kids are in the picture. I was about to respond when my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Emily Jossman's name. "I should take this," I told Mark. "Mrs. Jossman, this is Dean." "Mr. Calix." Her voice was crisp, controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. "I wanted to thank you for the information you provided yesterday. It was illuminating. I'm sorry you had to learn about it this way. I'm not. I'm sorry it took this long." She paused, and I heard papers rustling in the background. "I've filed for divorce. My attorney has already frozen Tanner's access to our joint accounts and initiated discovery proceedings. I wanted you to know that your evidence will be very helpful in establishing the timeline of his infidelity. I'm glad it's useful. There's something else. Tanner was placed on administrative leave this morning pending an internal investigation into his conduct. Apparently, using company resources to facilitate personal relationships violates several policy guidelines. That was faster than I'd expected. How did the company find out? I may have forwarded your email to their human resources department along with my attorney's letter." Her voice carried a note of satisfaction that reminded me why I'd liked her the few times we'd met at company events. I thought they should know how their travel budget was being spent. After Emily hung up, I sat in Mark's office processing the implications. Mira hadn't just lost her marriage, she'd potentially lost her career. Tanner's administrative leave meant the Morrison account would be reassigned, probably to someone outside their department. Her mentor and protector was now a liability. "Sounds like your wife picked the wrong horse," Mark observed. "She picked the wrong husband, too." My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Natalie, Mira's friend. You need to call off whatever you're doing. She's falling apart." I showed the message to Mark, who read it and shook his head. "The flying monkeys are mobilizing. This is when things get ugly." He was right. Over the next hour, I received calls and messages from half a dozen people in Mira's social circle. Some were angry, accusing me of vindictive behavior and public humiliation. Others were more subtle, suggesting that marriages could be saved with proper counseling and forgiveness. I ignored them all. I'd learned a long time ago that other people's opinions about your personal decisions were usually more about their own insecurities than your actual situation. At noon, Mark and I finished reviewing my legal position and preparing our strategy. The prenuptial agreement gave me significant advantages, but Mira could still make the process expensive and time-consuming if she wanted to fight. She'll probably try to claim emotional distress, Mark warned as I gathered my papers. Maybe argue that your actions were calculated to cause maximum humiliation. Were they? That's not the point. The point is whether you can prove your actions were reasonable responses to her infidelity. I left Mark's office with a clear understanding of what I was facing. Mira had lost the first battle, but she hadn't surrendered. If anything, cornering her had probably made her more dangerous. The afternoon brought confirmation of that theory. I was working from home, trying to focus on a client's network security audit, when my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a police cruiser parked in my driveway. The officer at my door was young, probably in his late 20s, with the careful politeness that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Calix, I'm Officer Martinez with the Suburban Police Department. We received a complaint about possible harassment and stalking. I need to ask you a few questions." I invited him inside, offered coffee, and listened as he explained the situation. Mira had filed a report claiming that I'd been monitoring her activities, accessing her private accounts, and sharing personal information without her consent. She'd provided screenshots of the email I'd sent to Emily Jossman as evidence of my obsessive and vindictive behavior. "Is it true that you sent private information about your wife to a third party?" Martinez asked, consulting his notes. "I sent factual information about my wife's activities to the wife of the man she was having an affair with. Everything I shared was documented and verifiable." "Did you access your wife's private social media accounts?" "No. The photos were provided to me by a mutual friend who was concerned about my wife's behavior." Martinez seemed relieved that the situation wasn't as complex as he'd feared. "Mr. Calix, I have to ask, do you have any intention of continuing to contact Mrs. Jossman or anyone else connected to your wife's workplace?" "No. I've said everything I needed to say." "And you're not monitoring your wife's current activities or attempting to interfere with her living situation?" "Officer Martinez, I'm an IT professional. If I wanted to monitor someone's digital activities, you'd never know I was doing it. The fact that you're here asking these questions suggests I'm not doing anything sophisticated or illegal." He smiled at that. "Fair point. Look, Mr. Calix, I can see this is a domestic situation that got out of hand. Your wife seems upset, but nothing you've described sounds criminal. I'd recommend keeping your distance from her and letting your lawyers handle everything from here." After he left, I sat in my kitchen and considered my options. Mira's police report was clearly a tactical move designed to establish a paper trail of my allegedly threatening behavior. She was building a case for something, probably a restraining order or a claim of emotional distress. But she'd made a mistake. By involving the police, she'd created an official record of her accusations. If those accusations turned out to be false or exaggerated, it would damage her credibility in divorce proceedings. I spent the evening documenting everything: Martinez's visit, the exact questions he'd asked, my responses, and the timeline of events that had led to Mira's complaint. If this was going to become a war of documentation, I intended to win. Wednesday morning brought the next escalation. I woke up to find my car vandalized. Someone had keyed long scratches into the paint on both sides and spray-painted "Liar" across the windshield. The damage was extensive enough to require professional repair, but not severe enough to involve insurance fraud charges. I photographed everything before calling the police to file a report. Martinez responded again, looking less sympathetic than he had 2 days earlier. Any idea who might have done this? He asked, taking pictures of the damage. I have suspicions, but no proof. Would these suspicions involve your wife or her friends? It's possible. I've been getting angry calls and messages from people in her social circle since Monday. Martinez finished his report and handed me a case number for insurance purposes. Mr. Calix, I'm going to give you some advice. This situation is escalating, and escalation rarely ends well for anyone involved. Maybe it's time to consider backing down. Backing down from what? I haven't done anything except protect my own interests. You humiliated your wife and her boss in front of their colleagues and families. Some people might call that revenge. Some people might call adultery a betrayal, but I'm not the one vandalizing property or filing false police reports. After Martinez left, I called Mark to report the incident. He was less concerned about the vandalism than about the pattern it represented. She's trying to provoke you into doing something stupid, he warned. Don't take the bait. What if she keeps escalating? Then she keeps creating evidence of her own unstable behavior. Let her hang herself. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. But Mark's advice was easier to give than to follow. That afternoon, I received a certified letter from Mira's attorney, a document that made my situation significantly more complicated. The letter informed me that Mira was pregnant. I read the notification 3 times before the implications sank in. She was claiming to be 6 weeks pregnant, which would place conception during our last intimate encounter before her Chicago trip. She was demanding that I cease all harassment and intimidation and provide immediate financial support for her and the child. The timing was suspicious. 6 weeks would put conception right at the edge of plausibility, but it was also convenient for her legal strategy. A pregnant wife had significantly more leverage in divorce proceedings than a cheating wife. I called Mark immediately. How sure are you about the timeline? He asked, after I'd read him the letter. I'm sure about when we were last together. I'm not sure about when else she might have been with someone. We need a paternity test. Can we demand one? Not until after the birth, unless she agrees to prenatal testing. But we can certainly question the timing and request verification. I hung up feeling like I was playing a game where the rules kept changing. Every move I made triggered a counter-move from Mira, each one more desperate and potentially damaging than the last. But desperation made people sloppy. If Mira was lying about the pregnancy or its timing, she'd eventually make a mistake that would expose her deception. If she was telling the truth, then I had bigger problems to worry about. Either way, I needed more information. That evening, I called Lisa, the colleague who'd originally shown me the Chicago photos. Dean? I was wondering when I'd hear from you. The office has been crazy since Tanner got suspended. Suspended? Not just on leave? Full suspension pending investigation. Apparently, Emily Jossman provided some very detailed documentation to HR. Tanner's been banned from the building while they review his conduct. What about Mira? Lisa paused. She's been out sick since Tuesday. Stress leave, according to her assistant. But there are rumors about reassigning the Morrison account and restructuring her department. Lisa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Okay. How long have Mira and Tanner been involved? Another pause, longer this time. Dean, I like you, but I'm not sure I should... Please, I'm not asking for gossip. I'm asking for facts that might affect my legal situation. At least 6 months, maybe longer. It started after the Henderson and Associates holiday party last year. Everyone in the office knew, but nobody wanted to say anything because Tanner controls so many accounts. 6 months. That changed everything. If their affair had been ongoing since the holiday party, then the Chicago trip wasn't the beginning of their relationship. It was just the most recent chapter. Lisa, did anyone ever see them together outside of work, before Chicago? A few times. Natalie mentioned seeing them at that expensive restaurant downtown, Romano's, back in the spring, and someone from accounting saw Mira getting into Tanner's Porsche in the parking garage after hours. After I hung up, I sat in my home office and recalculated everything I thought I knew. The pregnancy timeline became much more complicated if Mira and Tanner had been sleeping together for months. The child could be his, mine, or theoretically someone else's entirely. But the longer timeline also gave me more opportunities to gather evidence. 6 months of an affair meant 6 months of potential documentation, restaurant receipts, hotel records, witness statements, digital communications. I opened my laptop and began a new phase of research. If Mira wanted to play the pregnancy card, I'd make sure everyone involved understood exactly how many possible fathers were in the game. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." I stared at the message for a long moment, then screenshot it and added it to my evidence file. Threats were just another form of documentation, and documentation was the only weapon I needed. The war was just getting started. Thursday morning brought an unexpected ally. I was reviewing client security protocols when my doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a woman in her 40s standing on my porch, dressed in the kind of understated elegance that suggested both money and good taste. "Mr. Calix? I'm Emily Jossman. I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced." I invited her in, offered coffee, and waited while she settled herself in my living room. Up close, she looked tired but determined, like someone who'd spent the last few days making difficult decisions and was committed to seeing them through. "I wanted to thank you again for the information you provided," she began, "and I wanted to share some things I've learned that might be relevant to your situation." "What kind of things?" "Tanner's financial records, for starters. My attorney obtained them as part of our divorce proceedings." She opened a leather portfolio and extracted several documents. "Your wife isn't the first employee he's had an inappropriate relationship with." The papers she showed me painted a picture of systematic infidelity spanning several years. Hotel charges, restaurant expenses, jewelry purchases, all paid for with company credit cards and carefully categorized as business expenses. "There was an assistant named Jennifer 2 years ago," Emily explained. "She left the company suddenly after Tanner's interest moved elsewhere. Before that, a junior account executive named Amanda. The pattern is always the same. He targets ambitious women who depend on his approval for career advancement." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because your wife is about to learn what happens when Tanner gets bored or feels threatened. He's already distancing himself from her to protect his own position." "How do you know?" Emily smiled grimly. "Because I've been married to him for 15 years. I know how he operates when he's in survival mode." She was right. Over the next hour, she outlined Tanner's predictable response to crisis. Deny everything, blame the woman, claim he was seduced or manipulated, and present himself as the victim of female ambition. "He'll throw Mira under the bus to save his own career," Emily predicted. "And when he does, she'll realize that her pregnancy announcement was premature." "You think she's lying about being pregnant?" "I think she's desperate. Desperate people make poor strategic decisions." After Emily left, I spent the afternoon processing what she'd told me. If Tanner was already abandoning Mira to protect himself, then her position was weaker than I'd realized. The pregnancy claim might be her last attempt to secure some kind of leverage in our divorce proceedings. But leverage only worked if the other party was willing to negotiate. I wasn't interested in negotiation. I was interested in complete victory. Friday brought confirmation that Emily's predictions were accurate. Lisa called me during my lunch break, her voice tight with barely controlled excitement. "You need to hear what happened at the office today," she said. "I'm listening." "Tanner came in this morning with his attorney. They met with HR for 3 hours, and then they called in everyone who worked on the Morrison account. Tanner's claiming that Mira initiated their relationship and that he tried to maintain professional boundaries. Anyone believe that? The people who matter don't. But he's got documentation, emails from Mira that could be interpreted as flirtatious, Records of her requesting to work late with him, that kind of thing. He's building a case that she was the aggressor. What about Mira? Still out sick. But her assistant is fielding calls from headhunters, which suggests she's already looking for a new job. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mira had risked our marriage for a relationship with a man who was now actively trying to destroy her reputation to save his own. She'd traded 8 years of stability for 6 months of excitement, and now she had neither. That evening, I received a call from Mark with an update on our legal strategy. Mira's attorney wants to meet, he said. They're requesting mediation to discuss temporary support and living arrangements. What kind of support? Medical expenses, housing assistance, basic living costs, standard requests for a pregnant spouse. And if I refuse, they'll file a motion with the court. But Dean, refusing might not be smart. A judge could see it as vindictive, especially if she's actually pregnant. I considered the options. Agreeing to mediation would give me an opportunity to see Mira's evidence and assess the strength of her position. Refusing would make me look unreasonable, but would also force her to reveal her strategy in court documents. Set up the meeting, I decided. But I want everything documented. The mediation was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Mark's office. That gave me 4 days to prepare my own documentation and strategy. I spent the weekend gathering evidence. The financial records Emily had shared, combined with Lisa's information about the office affair timeline, painted a clear picture of Mira's relationship with Tanner. I created a detailed timeline showing their activities over the past 6 months, cross-referenced with my own calendar to identify periods when Mira had lied about her whereabouts. The pattern was more extensive than I'd initially realized. Late nights that she'd blamed on client emergencies corresponded to Tanner's travel schedule. Weekend strategy sessions aligned with times when Emily was out of town visiting her mother. Even their Chicago trip had been preceded by several smaller trips that I'd never questioned. By Sunday evening, I had assembled a comprehensive case file that would make any attorney nervous. If Mira wanted to claim that I was the father of her child, she'd have to explain why she'd been having an affair for 6 months before conception. Monday brought an unexpected development. I was working in my home office when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Mira's number, the first time she'd tried to contact me directly since Wednesday. "Dean, we need to talk." Her voice sounded different, smaller, less confident than I was used to hearing. "Our attorneys are handling everything now," I replied. "Please, just 5 minutes. I'm outside." I looked through my window and saw her car parked across the street. She was sitting behind the wheel, phone pressed to her ear, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Against my better judgment, I agreed to let her come inside. She looked terrible. Her usually perfect makeup was minimal and uneven. Her clothes, while still expensive, looked like she'd slept in them. The confident, ambitious woman I'd married had been replaced by someone who seemed lost and frightened. "I made a mistake," she said without preamble. "Which mistake? The affair or getting caught?" "All of it, everything. I know you probably won't believe me, but I never meant for things to go this far." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. "How far did you mean for them to go?" "I don't know. It started as just attention. Tanner made me feel important, like my ideas mattered, and then it became something else, and I couldn't figure out how to stop it without ruining my career." "So you decided to ruin our marriage instead?" She started crying then. Not the calculated tears of someone trying to manipulate a situation, but the exhausted sobs of someone who'd finally realized the full scope of what she'd lost. "Dean, I'm pregnant, and I don't know what I'm going to do. Tanner won't return my calls. The company is going to fire me as soon as their investigation is complete. I don't have anywhere to go." "Whose child is it?" "I don't know." The admission came out as barely a whisper. It could be yours. It could be his. The timing makes it impossible to tell. At least she was being honest now. What do you want from me? I want to come home. I want to try to fix this. I looked at the woman I'd been married to for 8 years and felt something that might have been pity. She'd gambled everything on a relationship with a man who discarded her the moment their affair became inconvenient. Now she was facing unemployment, divorce, and single motherhood with no support system. But pity wasn't the same as forgiveness, and forgiveness wasn't the same as reconciliation. Mira, you can't come home. This marriage is over. Because of the affair? Because of the lying. The affair was just the symptom. The lying was the disease. She cried harder at that, and I found myself remembering better times. Early mornings when she'd make coffee while I read her the news. Evenings when we'd plan vacations we'd never take. Quiet moments when I'd thought we were building something permanent together. But those memories belonged to a different version of Mira, one who'd disappeared somewhere between ambition and adultery. I'll help with medical expenses if the child is mine, I said finally. But I won't pretend this marriage can be saved. After she left, I sat in my living room and tried to process what I was feeling. Not satisfaction. Her obvious misery didn't bring me any joy. Not regret. I'd made the right decisions based on the information available. Mostly I felt tired. The mediation meeting was still scheduled for Tuesday, but Mira's visit had changed the dynamic. She was no longer fighting from a position of strength. She was negotiating from desperation, which made her both more dangerous and more predictable. I spent Monday evening preparing for what I expected would be the final phase of our divorce proceedings. The pregnancy complicated things, but it didn't change the fundamental facts. Mira had chosen to end our marriage when she started her affair with Tanner. Everything else was just paperwork. My phone buzzed with a text from Emily Jossman. Tanner's attorney contacted mine today. He's willing to admit paternity if it helps his case with the company. Thought you should know. I stared at the message for a long moment, then forwarded it to Mark. If Tanner was ready to claim responsibility for Mira's pregnancy, it would resolve the paternity question and simplify our divorce proceedings considerably. It would also mean that Mira's last bargaining chip had just disappeared. The war was almost over, and I was about to win more decisively than I'd ever imagined possible. Tuesday's mediation meeting lasted less than an hour. Mira arrived with her attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Hendricks, who specialized in high-conflict divorces. They sat across from Mark and me in his conference room, and I could see immediately that their strategy had changed since Mira's visit to my house. My client is prepared to be reasonable about the terms of separation, Hendricks began. She's facing a difficult situation and hopes we can reach an amicable agreement. What kind of agreement? Mark asked. Temporary spousal support during the pregnancy, assistance with medical expenses, and a fair division of marital assets. In exchange, my client is willing to expedite the divorce proceedings and waive any claims to long-term alimony. I studied Mira while her attorney spoke. She looked better than she had on Monday. Professional makeup, conservative business attire, her hair pulled back in a style that suggested competence and responsibility. But I could see the fear in her eyes. What about paternity? I asked. Hendricks glanced at Mira before responding. My client believes Mr. Calix is the father, but she's willing to submit to testing after the birth to confirm paternity. That's interesting, Mark said, because we have evidence suggesting otherwise. He opened his briefcase and extracted the timeline I'd prepared, along with Emily Jossman's financial documentation and Lisa's witness statements. The papers painted a comprehensive picture of Mira's 6-month affair with Tanner, including dates, locations, and financial records. Hendricks reviewed the documents with increasing concern. Where did you obtain these financial records? From Mrs. Jossman's divorce attorney, as part of their discovery proceedings against her husband. And the witness statements. From colleagues at Henderson and Associates who were willing to testify about what they observed. Mira had gone pale during Mark's presentation. "Dean, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "You had an affair with your boss for 6 months. You lied to me repeatedly about your whereabouts and activities. You're pregnant, and you don't know who the father is. What am I missing? The timeline isn't what it looks like." "The timeline is exactly what it looks like. Hotel records, restaurant receipts, witness statements, and photographic evidence. You want to claim I'm the father? Fine. We'll do a paternity test, but if the child isn't mine, I want you to acknowledge that fact in our divorce settlement." Hendricks tried to regain control of the negotiation. "Mr. Calix, even if there's uncertainty about paternity, you're still legally responsible for supporting your wife during—" "Estranged wife," Mark corrected, "and only until the divorce is finalized." "Which brings us to our timeline," I added. "I want this completed within 60 days. 60 days isn't realistic for a contested divorce." "Then don't contest it. Accept the terms outlined in our prenuptial agreement, agree to expedited proceedings, and we can be done by Christmas." The room fell silent. Mira stared at the table while Hendricks reviewed our proposed settlement terms. The prenup was generous enough to avoid claims of unconscionability, but it heavily favored the spouse who hadn't committed adultery. "We'll need time to review these documents," Hendricks said finally. "You have 48 hours, Mark replied. "After that, we file with the court and let a judge decide." As they gathered their papers and prepared to leave, Mira looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Dean, I know you hate me right now." "I don't hate you, Mira. I just don't trust you, and I can't be married to someone I don't trust." After they left, Mark and I spent an hour reviewing our position and preparing for the possibility that Mira would reject our terms. "She'll take the deal," Mark predicted. "Her attorney knows how weak their case is." "And if she doesn't?" "Then we go to court with enough evidence to bury her. But it won't come to that. She's smart enough to recognize when she's beaten." Wednesday brought confirmation that Mark was right. Hendricks called in the morning to accept our settlement terms with minor modifications. Mira would receive temporary support through the end of her pregnancy, assistance with medical expenses if the child was mine, and her share of our marital assets as outlined in the prenup. In exchange, she agreed to expedited divorce proceedings and waived any claims to long-term alimony or property division. "There's one additional request," Hendricks added. "My client would like to include a non-disclosure agreement preventing either party from discussing the circumstances of the divorce publicly." "Absolutely not," I replied. "I haven't said anything publicly about this situation, but I won't agree to be silenced if someone else decides to spread lies about what happened. Mr. Calix, my client is concerned about her professional reputation." "Your client should have considered her professional reputation before she started having an affair with her married boss." In the end, we agreed to a limited confidentiality clause that prevented either of us from discussing intimate details of our marriage, but allowed factual statements about the reasons for our divorce. Thursday brought news about Tanner's situation. Emily called to update me on Henderson and Associates' internal investigation. "They're firing him," she said, "effective immediately." Apparently, the financial records I provided showed a pattern of misusing company resources that goes back 3 years. "What about his other victims?" "Jennifer and Amanda have both been contacted by the company's attorneys. There's talk of a settlement to avoid a lawsuit." "And Mira?" "She submitted her resignation yesterday. I heard she's taking a position with a smaller agency across town. Significant pay cut, but it's better than being fired." The irony was complete. Mira had risked everything for a relationship with a man who'd cost her both her marriage and her career. Tanner had lost his job, his marriage, and his reputation. I'd lost a wife I could no longer trust, but I'd kept my integrity, my financial security, and my self-respect. Friday brought the final piece of the puzzle. I was working in my home office when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Mira's number. "Dean, I need to tell you something. What? I talked to Tanner yesterday. He's willing to take responsibility for the pregnancy. I wasn't surprised. With his marriage and career already destroyed, admitting paternity was probably his attempt to salvage some small piece of his reputation. That simplifies things, I said. Dean, I want you to know that I never meant for any of this to happen. I made terrible decisions, and I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I know. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I considered the question carefully. Forgiveness wasn't about her. It was about me, and whether I was willing to carry anger and resentment into whatever came next. I forgive you, Mira, but that doesn't change anything between us. I know. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. After she hung up, I sat in my office and tried to imagine what my life would look like in 6 months. A smaller house, maybe, something that felt more like home and less like a museum of failed ambitions. Different routines, new priorities, the freedom to make decisions based on my own interests rather than someone else's expectations. For the first time in months, the future felt like something to anticipate rather than endure. Saturday morning, I received the final piece of documentation I'd been waiting for, a paternity test confirming that Tanner was the father of Mira's child. I forwarded the results to Mark, who incorporated them into our final divorce settlement. By Monday, all the paperwork would be filed, and our marriage would officially be over. I spent Saturday afternoon cleaning out closets and drawers, removing the last traces of Mira's presence from our house. Her books, her decorative objects, the expensive kitchen gadgets she'd insisted we needed but never used. I packed everything carefully and arranged for delivery to her new apartment. Sunday evening, I sat in my living room with a beer and my laptop, reviewing the events of the past month. From the moment I'd sent that first email to Emily Jossman, everything had unfolded with an almost mechanical precision. Mira's affair had been exposed, Tanner's career had been destroyed, their relationship had collapsed, and my marriage had ended exactly as it should have, with truth, consequences, and accountability. I hadn't set out to ruin anyone's life. I'd simply refused to accept lies and betrayal as the price of maintaining a comfortable fiction. The destruction that followed was entirely of their own making. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Paperwork filed. Divorce will be final in 30 days. Congratulations on your freedom. I raised my beer in a silent toast to the empty room, then opened my laptop and began researching vacation destinations. For the first time in 8 years, I could go anywhere I wanted without consulting anyone else's schedule or preferences. The war was over, and I had won more completely than I'd ever imagined possible. But victory felt less like triumph than like relief. The quiet satisfaction of a job well done and a problem permanently solved. Tomorrow, I would start building a new life, based on truth instead of compromise. Tonight, I would sit in my own house, drink my own beer, and enjoy the profound peace that came from knowing exactly who I was and what I was worth. The congratulations war had ended with only one survivor, and that survivor was me.